Welcome to the Fifth Gait Podcast. We have thrown around the idea of a podcast for years, but we finally made it happen, stuck in the truck together on a 10-hour road trip home from a horse show. Our passion is the Icelandic horse and all aspects of the worldwide community that surrounds this breed. Here, we come together as equestrian professionals to share our hardest lessons, biggest wins, and our future hopes in Icelandic horsemanship. Our conversations aim to educate, inspire, and grow all people like us who love Icelandic horses, from enthusiasts and amateurs to trainers, competitors, and field specialists. Okay. Welcome, Yohi, or
thank you very much.
Welcome, Johannes Amplatz. Things have been stuck in a scheduling loop, but we're finally out of that scheduling loop. And I want to start by just introducing you. You are both a trainer and riding instructor, a certified training and riding instructor from Hólar University. And you're also really a scientist, as in you have a master's now. You've just defended your master's thesis. And you're also a teacher of more of the science of horsemanship, as well as the practical riding and training side of things, which we love on this podcast because we love to nerd out and learn all sorts of different aspects and angles around the topic of everything horses and Icelandic horses. But I have a question for you to begin with, and that is, if you had to explain to a non-horse person what you do for a living in a couple of minutes, what would you say?
Well, it's a very good question. It's, I think, kind of weird, right? I think you have had the problems yourself. How do you explain this? So I think I tried also to do it in some kind of connection between, like, the sports aspect. You know, I'm trying to explain, yes, you're training a horse like an athlete, like you would train yourself for a marathon or whatever. So I very often use this kind of approach. So some kind of sports physiology approach. And then also kind of the animal approach, and that you like to be around animals and kind of, I know if you can call them that, but they are kind of pets too, right? Even though they're bigger than a dog or a cat. But I think I try to use these two approaches depending a little bit on situations. But I think the sports part, is kind of how I try to explain it to people, because I feel there's maybe the closest where people connect, right? They're used to train themselves a little bit or follow sports or whatever connection they have to sports. The kids are in sports, their parents or whatever.
Do you feel that your role, especially from the scientist angle, is really further and better understanding equine physiology?
I like to have a very wide approach. So, I mean, there is a lot of topics in science, but I really like the physiology of it. And I mean, my master's has kind of been focusing on it, on the physiology part, even though we didn't make physiological measurements directly, or we're not able to in that occasion, but it's kind of connected to physiology and training horses. So I really like that aspect, but try to keep a very open and wide lookout for research. Kind of maybe as important, you know, like there's so many aspects on it, you know. Physiology is just one part. It's a really important part, but I mean, there's locomotion, there is anatomy, there is pressure measurements. I mean, whatever. There's a very wide approach. Then you can approach the rider on a kind of psychological way, and the horse as well. So I think it's important for everybody, even though you focus on something, to keep a really wide approach, because it is connected to so many things.
So I am coming from the perspective of not knowing you at all, other than you are the body weight ratio guy. And so Carrie had told me that you're from Italy, right?
Exactly. I'm originally from there and moved to Iceland. Exactly.
Okay. So how did you first encounter Icelandic horses?
So basically, I was really, really lucky, because there was some guy importing some Icelandic horses to Italy at a period of time, and that is exactly how my dad basically got connected to Icelandic horses. So he had a friend who knew this guy, and he really fell in love and bought some horses. And then I was just 1 year old or something like that. So I was really lucky, and then my family has had horses on a hobby basis since then. Basically, we have been breeding a little bit of hobby riding horses just for fun, and have had some horses. So that's how I connect. And I have actually grown up in Icelandic horses, even though being abroad and not a big cranty for Icelandic horses. I have not had so many connections. I mean, with big horses, like I started right away in Icelandic horses, even though, of course, there were big horses around you everywhere.
Was it always your goal to go to Hólar, or how did that path come about?
No, it was not basically a goal. I mean, I like this idea a lot. I like the scientific and knowledge approach of it, because I was really lucky to have good riding instructors in Italy, but still we were so far away from everything. I mean, most things are going on maybe in Scandinavia, Germany, or Austria, even Swiss. So you always have to travel abroad. So you were really far away from knowledge. And even though I was lucky to have some good instructors that really gave me a lot of knowledge there and taught me a lot. I like to get a little bit deeper. So that's why also I decided to move or go to Iceland, basically. I was supposed to come here from January to May, 11 years ago. So basically I'm still stuck, as it happens to so many people. But first I was actually, the other thought was maybe going to law school even, or veterinary approach. But then I kind of got stuck and tried out for Hólar and really like this approach and the people there and this knowledge, scientific part and approach on horsemanship. So that's how but it was not a plan. I didn't was like 15 years old. It's like, I'm gonna go to Hólar and that's what I want to do for life. So it kind of developed.
What do you think made you so interested in this broad scope learning and just so passionate about studying the Icelandic horse and all aspects of horsemanship?
That's a really good question, but I think it is so special, the Icelandic horse. I mean, I've just gotten to know it right away. I liked it a lot from the beginning. You also like Iceland, and of course, I mean, here it's so great because we just have this single horse breed in Iceland, no other horse breed. So there has been so much focus on the Icelandic horse here in Iceland. I mean, there's a lot of research working, from federal money for research or something. Is you can focus really on the Icelandic horse. So I think it is really interesting, and so I like to dive deeper in here, and then I got to know a really wide scope, as you call it. It has been so much focus and history about the horse here, and just so much focus on this specific breed because there is no other. So I think I kind of got caught up in it, if that may answer your question.
It's kind of interesting. We've had that conversation before, that Iceland and the Icelandic community, because of that focus there, really intensifies the learning and the knowledge development. And as a part of that, you've recently defended your master's thesis, and it was on the topic of body weight ratios between horse and rider in Icelandic horse sport riding specifically. What was the most common misconception that you encountered about this topic as you began your thesis, your research? And what was the most challenging aspect of conducting this research? Give us the kind of nitty gritty, dirty stuff.
I can try that. But I think the biggest misconception I have met is that there's a lot of discussion on this topic, which is not based on any specific knowledge or scientific research. I know that everybody has heard about this 20% body weight ratio, which you should not go over, and you should not be too heavy, you should not be that, you should not be there. But the research and knowledge we have on this topic actually is limited. And these numbers that you can see somewhere, I feel like from my knowledge and from what I have been looking at research, it is not based on any scientific research or any scientific database we have. So this is you kind of feel it sometimes seems it comes from, so like the first researchers referring to this 20% ratio, they're referring to some kind of military manual from the US, and then they say they talk about this 20% ratio, which is probably based on some kind of experience, which I mean is valuable knowledge until we don't have any published research on it or done any tests or experiments or trials. But still, we kind of need to see where the context is, where it's coming from. I mean, military riding is not what most people are doing, with their horses today, I would say. And I think this is the biggest misconception. I mean, you have, of course, military competition, but I mean, there's very few soldiers really doing it, in the military, in the cavalry, as we had it maybe 100, 200 years ago. I think that is the biggest misconception, that I feel that there's both a lot of discussions on it, and I understand it. I mean, it's a really how can I say it? Really a topic that's connected to a lot of feelings, also difficult and hard feelings. And I know everybody wants to do well with the horse, and that's where this welfare discussion comes from. But I think it's also important that we base it on knowledge we have, and we focus on the knowledge and make decisions and focus our discussions based upon that. So I think that is that to answer that question. And about conducting the research, of course, the logistics were not easy. I mean, the World Championships is a high-level competition. There's a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure. There's a short time. There's a very tight schedule. So I think the most difficult part was to both be able to get there, to make a schedule that 5-hour organization would accept, so it would not have negative impact on the World Championships and the riders and horses. So that's why we conducted the study before the start of the competition. And then, of course, I felt it was really good. A lot of riders showed up and showed support, but we really had to do a lot of advertising on the research. And I think it is, or I could think it is possibly because there has been so much discussion on this topic, maybe even on a negative basic, in a negative way. So people are afraid we are there, to gather data to ban them to ride Icelandic horses because they exceed some kind of body weight ratio, which of course was totally not our goal. And actually it's so important, to get the data on these horses, because these horses, they get there, they're healthy, they compete on very high level, they have been in training for a long time, for many years. So it's really important to get the data on these horses. And even though they carry maybe higher body weight ratios than this 20% that so many people are talking about, it's good to know that horses can do that and still stay healthy and perform on a high level.
You're speaking to a need for riders to appreciate that maybe people doing this research are actually working for them. They're trying to be, obviously all research should not be biased, but that the scientists are not going into this trying to attack riders, or in fact, it may be the opposite. They're looking to support what the riders are doing with real data.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. At least it's not our goal, and of course we're not biased. But I mean, and we go there unbiased, and I know that we know from our experience, that the Icelandic horse can do a lot, and we know that these horses have been carrying heavy weights for a long time, and they do well with it. But we need to gather data, to get it recognized, and it's also really important to do experiment to try, which is to keep out, some things that might trouble, experience or personal experience. But it is, of course, not at all our goal to go there and ban things. And I know there has been a lot of discussions on it, and discussions maybe on social media or on wherever have been really negatively impacted, I feel. But it is not the goal of any researchers or anybody, I think, at least of good researchers, to go there and do that. And I mean, if we allocate some kind of a problem, an area where we have a problem, then we need to find solutions, That is really important to know.
Question, because I'm realizing Mackenzie and I were actually there in the Netherlands,
yes,
where you were
were
collecting your data.
That's right.
Because we were both grooms for Team USA. And I'm curious if you could give everybody just a brief summary of your research and what it involved, and maybe the initial conclusions that you've had from it or you've been able to draw from it.
Exactly. I can do that. And also, first of all, I want to say I really want to thank the writers and Five for making this possible. This is a really high pressure event, and riders still showed up and did participate very well. And Five was helping us, the organizers of the World Championship. So I just want to make sure that is straight. So it was great help from the community. This is amazing. And yeah, so what have been the main goals of the research that we have been doing? I mean, the main purpose, of course, has been just to get an overview of the population or the data, basically just take the status quo, where are we at in high-level Icelandic horse sports? So what we did is we were measuring riders, we were measuring their tack, we were measuring horses, like the weight of them, and then with the horses we also were measuring the body measurements, which are also conducted during breeding assessments. So height at withers, height at back, height at width of chest, and all these things, just to get also some idea on the building, or on the conformation of these Icelandic horses that are competing there at this event. And which is also important, it is international, That's why also we really put pressure on. We wanted to go to the World Championships to get some international data. I can maybe give you just some basic data which we got out of the research, which is some descriptive statistics maybe, which could be interesting. So the average horse weight was around 355 kilograms. I don't know what that is in pounds, so because I'm using European measurement units, so maybe I guess we can use some calculators online.
I think it's like 750 pounds.
My guess,
800 pounds.
Uh-oh, did he cut out?
Uh-oh, he's gone.
I moved to the kitchen. There is sometimes, so as I told you, we just moved, and so the internet is sometimes
a little weird.
I know if it's a problem, but I have had team meetings there which worked out fine, but maybe it did not manage to do this. I don't know. So the average horse weight was around 355 kilograms, which I guess is around 782 pounds, right? I just used some online calculator to figure that out.
Yeah.
The average rider weight was 67 kilograms, which is 147 pounds. The average tack weight was 8.5 kilograms. So the average tack weight was 18 pounds. And rider and tack weight combined were at around 75 kilograms, which is 165 pounds, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Which leads us to our average body weight ratio of 21.3%. And maybe it's interesting to also see how big the horses were. The average horse height was 140.3 centimeters, which is around 55 inches. Could that be?
And I have a question. I just may not know the answer to this because I am not super familiar with your study. Was it all of the riders and horses at the World Championships that consented to do this?
No, it was not everybody that was taking part. What we got, I think we got around more than 90 measurements on riders and horses.
Well, that's great.
Which is quite a good number.
Yeah.
64% in the sports group.
Oh.
So it is more than half, more than 60% of riders that took part, which I think is quite a good number on such a high level and event. Because it's always difficult to get people to show up for research and because they are so busy, and I mean they have a lot of pressure on themselves. So
especially to step on a scale and all that. I mean, I'm just saying, for some people, that's a very sensitive topic too. So the fact that we had over half of the riders buy into this and show up in what some may perceive as a more vulnerable data collection process, I think is really actually awesome.
For the greater mission of science.
Exactly.
Exactly. And as you say, it's really vulnerable, and we try to do our best, that no data, no personal data gets out and is linked to anybody, also in the data work. So we really try to focus on that, because we know it is some kind of, as I say, vulnerable and difficult for people to step on a scale that can be. So I think that we are pretty happy with that, and we also send out a questionnaire, and I think it's 88 answers we got back. So that's also really got rate, of these 94 riders. So almost everybody took the time to answer a questionnaire during this time. So really, really happy about that. But maybe to go just to the results, to discuss the data a little bit more. So if we just took the distribution of the body weight ratios, so about 90% of riders had a body weight ratio of 25% or less, and 100% were below the 35% body weight ratio, and 99% were 30% or less. So you can see that the most distribution is below the 25% body ratios of the World Championships.
What kind of conclusions or thoughts do you think it's possible at this point to draw from this study? Or what things do you think were interesting that we should think about more based on the results of your study?
So, I mean, basically, of course, we get quite a high number of riders at these World Championships that compete on a high level. And also the horses need to pass veterinary inspections, right? So they have to go through inspections before competition and also after competition. So this leads us to the conclusion that there's a good number of Icelandic horses that can perform and stay healthy while carrying a body weight ratio on average of 21%, and even reaching up to over 30%. So, this is, I think, some valuable information to get kind of a little bit around the long-term effects, Of course, we know that if a horse is unhealthy and has problems, they don't show up at the World Championships. So there is a little bit of pre-selections, but there is a pretty good number of horses that perform well and stay healthy while carrying these riders, which even exceed this conventional or classical 20% rule, which so many people talk about. So that is one of the conclusions, and of course it's good to know, where the ranges is and what we're working with in the Icelandic horse. And we also try to determine, is there, we try to make two groups of horses, so high performing horses and lower performing horses. And we took the top 10 riders, or riders that had the highest placement in the top 10, and those that were placing below the top 10 or 11th or lower. And it did not seem that both rider weight or body weight ratio had any effect, or like these groups had a difference, a significant different body weight ratio or rider weight. So at least from this data we can, of course it's a little bit limited because there's a lot of effects and we cannot exclude many factors, but we still can say that the top 10 horses, they don't carry lighter riders than horses performing lower, So it does not seem to have a really huge effect on competition outcome. That is one of the things. And what we also took then to compare these horses is we took their body measurements. And one of the outcomes there was that horses in the top 10, they had a slightly different conformation than horses placing 11th or lower. They had difference in body measurements, and it turned out that they had, for example, a more uphill conformation, and they also had a wider chest. which is interesting. We also found out that horses in the top 10, they were a little bit higher at withers and had a little bit longer legs. I mean, that is also having effect. And what is really interesting is that this is supporting other research we have on Icelandic horses, right? So there has been done research on breeding shows, and they were basically taking horses, like the horse measurements, and trying to connect it with a rideability score in the breeding shows. And it's also these measurements that turned out to have positive effect on rideability. So more uphill, conformation, wider chest. And what is also interesting is that there was performed a research on the weight-bearing capacity on Icelandic horses, where they used Icelandic tour horses. And they could also find out similar body measurements. So they also, and then they used, physiological parameters like lactate and heartbeat. So they found out also that exactly these measurements, so uphill conformation, wider chest, did have also a positive effect on the weight-bearing capacity measured on physiological parameters. So I think that's really, really interesting knowledge and so fun and interesting to see that, it shows up on different places with different measurements, but still the same conformation. This is telling us that this might be some important measurements to have in mind when both breeding horses and, of course, when selecting a horse as your riding horse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that might also explain, on research, there's a lot of individual difference, on the research that has been on Icelandic horses, especially. There is a very huge difference on individuals, how well they can cope with the weight. And so the conformation might be one of the factors which is affecting the weight-bearing capacity of horses, right?
That's captivating. That's really interesting. Wow.
It makes me want to go measure all of the horses in our farm.
Exactly.
It does.
Exactly. It does is fun. But I think this is things you should try to look out. Is the horse uphill? Does the horse have a very narrow chest or does it have a wider chest? And which did not show up in our research, like the results, we did not get a difference there, but it showed up in the other two research, is the back line is having a positive effect. So
that has showed up in other research, but not in specifically.
Not at the World Championships, but it showed up, I think, if I recall it correctly, in the breeding show research, but definitely in the Icelandic horse physiological research. And so basically, they should not have, a big difference in between height at back and height at withers or height at croup. So you basically don't want a too weak backline, right? Which could be a sway back or a sloping backline. So that might also have a lot of influence on the weight-bearing capacity of horses based on the knowledge we have.
Do you think there was any results that surprised you in your research or in this study?
Well, basically, we went there. There is no data on it, but we were surprised based on data we have on breeding shows, and so that actually the rider weight and the rider and the body weight ratio was a little bit lower than expected in this data. We had quite a lot of female riders in the research, right? And we know there can be significant differences in between body weight and such factors.
Gotcha. Actually, that makes a lot of sense because breeding riders tend to be male in many instances, I would say.
Yeah.
And at World Championships and in sport competition, we're seeing a rise percentage-wise in female riders. So that actually tracks. What do you feel like we actually know about this question of body weight ratio that is backed by science?
So I think we have some research on it now, especially also on the Icelandic horse. So what we know is that at least on a short-term way, in a short-term view, trained Icelandic horses perform pretty well carrying heavy loads, right? because it was really interesting when we look at so we have two main researchers that we focused on. We have one researcher where they researched the Icelandic riding horses or school horses at Hólar University. And then they made an incremental exercise test, basically just increasing the weight on the horse. Like they started at 20%, then went up to 25, 20, 30, and 35. And what turned out there, it is that both we have this very huge variability within individuals, but the average body weight ratio when horses reach their lactate threshold, is that something you know? Or you know it in physiology? It basically means after a horse reaches the lactate threshold, it means that the lactate accumulates exponentially, meaning much faster than before. Just meaning that the horse is getting closer to fatigue, getting more tired, right? And while they perform below the threshold, they perform more aerobic, which meaning so less intense. And the average there was at around 22.7% for the horses, but there was a really big variability in it, right? And all the horses, they were more or less sound after the test, and they performed a pretty heavy test. So that is one of the notes we know. But of course, we also know, therefore, that it is more difficult physically for the horse to carry heavier weights, right? So increasing the weight means more difficulty for the horse on a physiological way of talking, which kind of makes sense, right? If you go on a trip and have a heavy backpack on you, it's more difficult than being with no backpack or having a light one, right? So this is just backing up some kind of feeling we might have already. But still we know that they can perform. And then they published this research actually just last summer. They made this research on these tour horses, which I don't know if the listeners know, but you maybe know it. In Iceland you go on these horse trips with a big herd and they go just for very long distances, right? So they made a test after the season with those horses, and it's so interesting because these horses had an average lactate threshold of 30 or 31%. So it was above the 30 mark line, right? So they basically were performing aerobically, even though reaching 30-31% body weight ratios. And some horses even didn't reach this lactate threshold, even though they carried 35% of their body weight ratio.
Holy smokes,
So that is, I mean,
that's pretty significant.
They performed amazingly, and it's crazy, what these horses could do on a physiological way of talking, right?
Do you think that maybe had a little bit to do with the kind of work that you're asking from them versus like on an oval track and in an open level class when you're asking for, quite a demand of sort of engagement and training versus on a trek, you're sort of allowing the horse to move in a way that it's most comfortable to them, even though it's over a longer period of time.
Yeah. I mean, you may speculate that this could be an effect of the training and the work the horse has been put through. And this might also be an adaptation to trading, right? Like based on what the work they have been doing. And that is something, as you asked, what is something we don't know? We don't know on a scientific way, how does training affect weight bearing capacity, right? And I know that is a research that the people at Hólar have been really eager to do and are trying to look for funding is like, can we, with different training methods, increase weight-bearing capacity of horses? I mean, we know that horses can adapt to training, but we don't know it exactly. How is it with this weight-bearing? I mean, you might speculate that they can, based also on the research a little bit we have, but this is speculations, right? So this is, I'm not telling this is like data we have that this is not scientifically backed up on a very broad ground, I would say,
Absolutely.
And
what do you think? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just one thing also wanted to, what we still don't know so much about is the long-term effects. It is so difficult to get around long-term effects on this kind of topic, especially in horses, because research is getting so expensive and difficult to do, and there's so many variables, that may play in there or come into there. So, I mean, we have some experience on the mean age on the school horses and at Hólar, and we know they carry more than this 20% rule. I mean, we have now some data on the competition horses of Icelandic horses, and we know that the average age was around, I think it was 11 or 13. So it was above the 10 years. So, and most horses have been in training for 5 or 6 or more years. So that is something we know. There we get a little bit of glimpse into the long-term effect, or at least we can say that some horses carrying the body weight ratios we measured at the Icelandic World Championships, they keep on being healthy and being able to perform. They don't have very huge health impact, at least not so health impact that they still cannot, or they could not longer perform on a high level, or they had to drop out from riding. So that is, there we get a little bit idea of it. But of course, it would be interesting to do a huge study on a larger scale to get more trustworthy information about it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. If you could design your dream study as the next study on this topic, what would it be?
Whoa, that is a really huge question. Well, there is one thing we would have loved to do also at the World Championships is to go on a such high scale event and take some physiological measurements too. Right? Because now we base it just on competition results. We know there's more effects. I mean, results is also given by judges. There's other things than just weight carrying capacity that goes in there, some aesthetical effects and quality of the gaits. So I think it would be really fun to do some measurements on a high scale event with physiological measurements, which of course, I understand why it was not possible at the World Championships, because then you need to take some blood samples or something like that, which of course is difficult on such an event, right? So it can give problems. Yeah. And of course, riders might not like to get taken blood samples while they're competing at the World Championships and other things. I can see that it's a lot logistically difficult, but it would be really interesting to get some physiological measurements, to make even more conclusions on the weight bearing and the intensity of the work that the horses were doing. That would be a dream.
I love it. That would be a cool dream.
Do you think, given all that you found in your study, that trainers or instructors should have a body weight ratio policy?
I do not support some rule on it, especially based, we have the limited scientific knowledge, and also we have knowledge on there's a huge variability within individuals. So I think we both don't have the knowledge on making one big rule and linking it to some kind of welfare impact. We don't have that really knowledge yet, or very limited indications. And we have the knowledge though that there's huge variability, so that's why I'm not supportive of any rules on it, at least at the time being. Mm-hmm. Of course, what I would suggest, based on the knowledge I told you, on the results on the body measurements and the conformation of the horse, I would of course ask riders, when they buy a horse or when they breed horses or so, to keep that in mind. Especially if you were afraid, maybe you were afraid of having a too high body weight ratio, something like that. Yeah, I mean, it might be when you choose your horse you ride on, or you buy yourself a horse. I mean, you could think of these measurements, because they make it more likely to cope well with a higher weight bearing capacity. And then, of course, I think we need some kind of some common sense into this, at least for the time being, So I think it is important. Go talk to your riding instructors, to your professionals around you, talk to your veterinarians. I don't know if you want to talk to physiotherapists, what you have around your horse and so, and just check out be always on the lookout. Is there any welfare issue in a way, or health issue? Maybe not welfare issue, but health issue. Is my horse safe and sound? And if your horse is keeping performing well, it is healthy. I mean, I would say, or at least I would guess so. You will not have. I mean, you will feel it if there's a really negative impact, right?
Mm.
But of course, it's always healthy for every person, to be in quite okay shape, because we are sportsmen as riders, right? Physically,
Yeah.
and also keep your horse in good shape, because we also know that obese horses or overweight horses has negative effect on their physiological performance, right? So horses that are not in good shape, there is a negative impact on the physiological performance. There has been research actually done even on Icelandic horses on that. So keep your horse.
Really? What was that study?
I think it was performed in Hólar, and what they did is they basically took a group of horses, and then half of the group had a low calorie intake, and the other one a high calorie intake, and then they performed. Basically, first they performed both a physiological test, and then they also performed a breeding show. So there were blinded judges assessing the horses. And then, they switched them around and did the same with the other group. And the final outcomes were basically that increased body weight and increased body fat percentage had negative impact on both the physiological parameters, but also the breeding results or breeding test results, basically performance in a real breeding exam. So, and the difference was just on average around 19-20 kilograms, which is not
very
significant.
No.
It's very huge, but it was significantly different on a statistic way, which is 45 pounds around there. So, I mean, you can measure it. So I think it's also try to keep your horse in good shape, because then it will be more ready physically to carry weight or to perform. And also,
this is going to sound stupid, but the horse's weight goes up, so then technically that means they can carry a heavier rider now.
Exactly. That is exactly
That's
a big
true.
point. It does not make really sense to get your horse very, very fat to increase the body weight ratio, because the horse is right.
It seems so stupid to say, but I think it's a legitimate actually thing to consider, and speaks to why you say you wouldn't necessarily recommend a policy, because just looking at, say, your horse's weight number could actually be misleading if they're in very poor physical condition in regards to how much weight they can safely carry. It's funny, but it's also a great example of this topic and how multifactorial this issue really is.
Well, and it goes back to how you mentioned we just need a little common sense in this too.
Yeah. I think
we can't be so literal.
No, we can't. At least not at the time being, and with the stage on research on this. But I'm afraid, I will say it like that. People always look for an easy answer, right? Which is, of course, in our nature. But I'm afraid, as you say, this is so multifactorial and such a complex topic. I'm afraid that there will be no easy answer to it, at least from what I can see now. Who knows? Maybe there comes some groundbreaking research and some knowledge. Then might be. But at least it is a very complex topic and theme. So I'm a little bit afraid that there will be not an easy answer. You know what I mean? Even though people would really love to have one, and I would love to have one too. But it is not, I think.
Let's shift to the future of horsemanship questions at this point. And the first one may seem obvious, especially the way this conversation has unfolded. And that is, why is the topic of body weight ratio so important to consider for the future of Icelandic horsemanship? And I would still, as obvious it may seem at this point, I would love to hear you talk about that, because I feel, at least, we are adults riding fluffy ponies. And I think that this is actually one of the most pressing topics in the Icelandic horse community. Would you agree with that? What is your take on that conversation?
So, of course, the rider weight and body weight ratio discussion is really important for the Icelandic horse, right? Because we have a rather small riding horse breed compared to many other breeds, right? Which will also mean both we possibly get higher body weight ratios, right? Because the horse is smaller and therefore lighter. And also the eyes might get affected, you know. People look above ponies being more like children's riding horse, and I think their eye gets really caught on it. You know, there's another big riders riding on this small pony horse, right? So I know we in the Icelandic horse world, we don't like this perception really much because we know it is not like that. But that's the perception from the outside, right? And with all these discussions on horse welfare and social license to operate, I guess everybody's heard it. I mean, it's really important that we're tackling this discussion. It is an important topic because it is the perception, and there might be also, I mean, we have also some research indicating that there can be problems, health issues with horses carrying very heavy loads, you know. It can go into muscle damage and such things, you know. Even though the research, at least one research we have, was performed on horses that have been on a holiday 3 or 4 months before the research, you know. So that is really good to know to how do horses perform without having had a rider on them for a long time, you know, that maybe the effects of training move out a little bit, but also to keep in mind when we draw conclusions, right? There might be a difference in results on horses that have been not in training for several months and horses that are in good training, right? And we need to be careful when we read research, right? But it might be a welfare issue, and that's why we need, of course, to address it. And I think it's really good that we have the research. I mean, the researchers in Iceland have been very early in researching this topic before there has been such a huge emphasis on it. So I think it's really strong for us to have this research because we have some data that proves that our horses cope quite okay, at least in a short time view with the weights and rather heavy weights, and they even can carry heavier weights than other horse breeds that are bigger, you know, based on their physiological response and based on keeping sound more or less after the tests they were doing.
What did you find most frustrating about doing your research and conducting your work specifically in the Icelandic horse community? Did you feel like there were maybe some disadvantages to sticking to the Icelandic horse population versus if you were to conduct your research on a more inclusive scale?
Or are there any trends in our community?
Yeah, any trends that maybe
are concerning or
That's true.
when it comes to this topic.
So you're talking about the Icelandic horse community now. Is there any
Yes.
trends?
Yeah, just specifically.
Okay, I mean, I think there was nothing really frustrating about this research, I can say, which I'm really happy. I mean, it was of course not easy, you know, to convince Five and everybody around that we can do it logistically, which of course is their job. I mean, they need to conduct the World Championships in a good way without big disturbances. I mean, that is their job to do. And of course, they wanted to check out before we conduct this research, can we do it in a way without disturbing the competition and riders and horses, which we managed with a good collaboration with them. I think that was the most, I would say, challenging part. And then everybody helped out so well to advertise it, and we had really great support within Five and the office of Five and the World Champion organizer and also the community. So I think there was nothing hugely frustrating about this research, right? Of course, there was a lot of organization and logistics that had to be managed, but that is just with every research, I guess. And I think what is good with the Icelandic horse community, it is maybe not such a big community also. So it's easier to reach out to people possibly, and to get them to perform or take part in the research. So I think that might be an advantage. And of course, I really focus being in Iceland with this only horse breed, which we all love so much. We focus a lot on the Icelandic horse, but I'm sure we need much further research also on other horse breeds, and what also we need to check out, I think, for the future is also to move out of professional sports also into kind of hobby and free time riding, right? So that is topic we might need to research too in the future, which can be done within every community or across communities.
That's one of my personal struggles sometimes within our community is I feel like the professional levels are oftentimes the most under fire on these topics and the most criticized because they're more public, right? And they're at the top, so they should be. But that group of people is oftentimes very actively working on participating in research and being a part of these discussions and furthering their knowledge. And ironically, there's maybe a lot less both criticism and thought going into the welfare of horses that are just being used in
leisurely
leisure riding and hobby situations. And those horses are very oftentimes, you mentioned the study where horses are pulled out of the field after a break. Many of those horses are not trained and ridden consistently, or maybe not managed in regards to their body condition as well. And it sounds like those variables may have a huge impact on their body weight carrying capacity.
Yeah, just the kind of work that they are in. Yeah.
Do you think that's true, that we need to be cautious about that?
To be cautious about, like, to think that the circumstances horses are in and the work and everything.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, just that there's a large population that we aren't really looking at.
Okay.
Horses.
Now I get the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we need to look out into every part of it. I mean, we are together in this, and we need to make sure, talking about social license to operate and horse welfare, we need to make sure that in every part of horsemanship, we treat our horses well and we do our best to give them a good life. And I think that is also one of the things we need to look out in this welfare debate, is that, of course, horses can have really good and positive effects out, or like a positive experience out of being ridden, of being worked with. Horses have the need for movement. Horses have the need for mental stimulation. Horses have the need to do something, and I think if you do it in a good way, it can be really positive for the horse too. And then we just need to find out what is the right way. That is what research is focusing on.
That's the ultimately difficult question. Well, in that same vein, so you are also a writer and a trainer and you teach in the local high school. So you're very involved in horsemanship as a whole. And it sounds like your family also did some breeding. One of the questions we ask many of our interviewees is, while we've evolved quite far in our goal of breeding this ultimate 5-gaited Icelandic horse, this Geiðingur, where do you see that goal evolving in the future? Where do you see us needing to breed horses? What direction do we need to breed horses? Maybe do we need to breed bigger horses, or is their size okay, and it's more important to think about their conformation? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we need more knowledge on there, but what I think is to use the first point, or the first thing is to use the knowledge we have, right? And I know that the breeding committee and the breeding guidelines have been taken into, there was research published, as I told you before, in the breeding horses and their conformation connected to the rideability score. And when they updated the breeding guidelines 2020, so approximately 5-6 years ago, they took this knowledge in there, So like horses have to be have a certain width of chest to get certain conformation scores. Horses with an uphill conformation and uphill movements, they get plus. It's positive. It is in the breeding and conformation guidelines. They've also put a lot of emphasis on the back line. So I think we have put a really good, we have started on a really good way. Of course, it will take time to adapt, to this new breeding. It's not new, but updated breeding goals. And I think we are on the right way. And I think, just for everybody to use the knowledge we have. And then I don't think we need a huge change in our breeding goals or whatever, I mean, the breeding goal still is to breed a good riding horse that is fun to use in every way, with a good character and with good gait, so a rider can enjoy, independent of what use or what work it is put through, right? And a horse that gets 10 for everything in a breeding assessment, I mean, that would be a great competition horse. That would be a great leisure and hobby horse. That would be a great children horse, even possibly, So I think we just need to stick on to what we have been doing, increasing our knowledge, using the knowledge we know, and then just think further. I don't feel we need, otherwise we don't need to totally change our system. I mean, we can always debate to improve it, but I think we don't need a huge change from what we have right now.
So I just had a thought. Do you think there are any other measurements that you would add to breeding assessments based on just your own research and conclusions?
So we, of course, use the measurements we had. So I think there's not a huge need for, I mean, they are already pretty good and a lot of measurements.
Yeah.
I think one thing we might take into consideration is, can we measure how broad the back is? Because there was some indications in the first study on Icelandic horses that a broader back might have positive impact on the weight carrying capacity. Then they tried to research it with the tour horses. There was not seen, at least on those horses, no difference in between broad and not broad back. But there is some indications that it might help. So maybe it could be interesting to measure, it's difficult to do it. That's why it's probably not in there. But if you can measure like how the shape of the back, more not just like the length of it and the back line, but also how broad it is and how well muscled it is, and get database on all these breeding horses we show, many hundreds and thousands of horses a year, and so then we get a very huge data set. Then we can draw even bigger conclusions. We have big data set. Then that is really interesting. I mean, that is something we could consider. I know it is there. They are judges are doing it on like also subjective perception. They look at the back and they sign in if it's broad or if it's maybe missing muscles. But I mean, could be interesting to do it also by measurement.
Get a more objective metric on that.
Exactly.
One of the hot topics is some people are very unhappy that Icelandic horses have gotten bigger. And some want the Icelandic horse to get bigger. Do you have an opinion on the height it withers and how much that relates to all this or not? Do you think it's important we breed larger horses or not?
So if you look at the breeding goals, we basically say we don't want to breed too small horses. That's the way there, So you won't get negative impact on your conformation if you're above some measurements, but also only if you are below. But I don't know all the data on this topic and everything. But of course, I mean, we want to breed strong horses and we don't want to breed too small horses. I hear from people that are working with sales that the market wants bigger horses, right? But also I think we need to take the welfare concern in it. Because the Icelandic horse has developed within some kind of physiological range. And I recall I was on a meeting with Michael Weishaupt. He's a professor and veterinarian. And I recall him telling a story about the quarter horse. So they were breeding huge groups with a lot of muscles to increase muscles. But then the legs basically got too weak to support all these muscles. So I'm not familiar or very much into this quarter horse world, but that is something that I've heard and they have had. So, I mean, there I think we need to consider it. Can we go too big? Might it have a negative impact on the horse welfare, horse health, and maybe also possibly on their performance? I mean, if you can go on with having the horse the same way we have it, having it healthy, having it be able to perform well, being a good riding horse. I mean, and if you want a bigger horse, there's nothing bad about it, I would say. But we need to consider it, maybe at one point you need to say this is too big because the bones or the structures within the horse are not supporting this kind of breeding goal or breeding way. It's not a goal, rather a way, So I think there we look out.
Well, unfortunately, I think this goes back to conversations we've had with other interviewees about the beauty of our breeding assessment system is that it very much protects us from single trait breeding. So at the end of the day, that's the great thing about sticking to our system and trusting all of the data that we try to collect in these, is that if we abide by the overall assessment based on all of the data we're collecting, and we're going by that overall quality instead of just focusing or prioritizing on one trait, then it should still serve the goal of a good, healthy riding horse.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So last question, how do you see Icelandic horsemanship evolving over the next 20 years?
I hope it goes on the way we have been doing a little bit. If you look a little bit back, the Icelandic horse has mainly been a working horse in Iceland. It has been a horse maybe used mainly for farm work, for carrying things and carrying people around. And after all the machines came, there has been much more focus on it as a competition, lesser riding horse. And with that, also the habit that says a lot of development on Icelandic horsemanship and knowledge on it. People went also more abroad to gather knowledge. They did research here and trials to get knowledge. We got an education system. We got Hólar University, which has been a really huge step here. And what I feel that has been happening through this, also in the last year, through education, through increasing knowledge and spreading knowledge, there has happened a lot in Icelandic horsemanship here in Iceland, at least since I moved here, which is 10 years ago or 11, which is not a very long time, I feel. But there's a lot of young riders are getting taught a lot. There's a lot of very good riding instructors. There's a lot of professional horse trainers that have very good knowledge and want to do well. They have the knowledge to train a horse in a healthy and good way. So I think we are on a start and good, and I think we should go on just improving our professionalism, improving our knowledge, sharing the knowledge. I feel that is also something where we could do better now, especially knowledge from Iceland going abroad. That I feel there's something a little bit, there's some kind of wall there sometimes in between. It's kind of not all going to the mainland.
Yeah.
And then just, evolve into and as we're doing it, animal welfare in our mind. We should just focus a lot to make the horses we have as friends just a nice life, a healthy life, just increase for everybody. It is for professional trainers, it is for leisure riders, it is for kids. I don't know, it's for people working with horses, driving horses maybe with a carriage, whatever you use for horse. Just try to gather more knowledge and getting better in what you're doing, gather more understanding for the horse, both on its nature, its behavior, its anatomy, its limits also, and what it can do well. And I think just go on with this movement, and I hope that maybe in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, this will just increase, and hopefully we will just come to a certain point we don't even consider like talks like social license to operate. We are through this theme. We have managed to work through it. We've managed to show and prove to everybody within and outside the community we are doing well. We can do this in a positive way. We can do it in a way that horses are happy, they are healthy, and even they have a positive impact, or it has a positive impact on their life. I think that would be a great way to go for the future.
I loved actually that last point you touched on, is about how would love to get to the point where we don't have to question what we're doing because we know. And I think that just goes back to the importance of funding this research and the importance of people like you in our community that are passionate and curious and determined to know what we don't know.
Yeah. Knowledge.
Yeah. To ensure our social license to operate, because the reason that this is such a question right now and such a hot topic is just because we don't know. Not even necessarily because it's an issue, because we just don't know if it's an issue.
We have a lot of opinions and very little bit.
Yeah.
That is, and that's also something I recall. One research which I looked for my master's thesis is that we have a lot of knowledge which is not getting adopted. And they made some interviews with trainers, and then they think, I would really like to research this topic, and there was research there, they didn't know about it. So I think maybe that's also more up to the scientific community to spread the knowledge, also in a way that it can be perceived, and understandable by everybody, by everybody out there and everybody who is interested, and I think maybe there's something the scientific community can also improve in, to spread the knowledge, but also for trainers and horse enthusiasts just to look a little bit deeper or read a little bit more, or talk to some researcher, or I mean, we have so much knowledge now online, to go there, try to find good knowledge, also try to see the difference, what is good knowledge, what is not so good knowledge, or what is the quality of the sources we are using, and then use this knowledge to make your opinion, not make an opinion and then maybe get to know knowledge later on.
I love that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us and also troubleshoot internet issues with us.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it got better and better as we went.
It did, yes.
That was easy. That was good.
Yeah, it was so fun. I've been looking so much forward to meeting you. I know that we have been trying to do this for quite a long time. I'm really thankful also for getting the possibility to share this knowledge with you, and getting these great questions you had prepared, and such a very good perception also, and a very great talk with the both of you. So I mean, that is just, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure being with you.
Thank you for listening to the Fifth Gait Podcast. I know you've heard this on other channels, but it really is so important that you like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening through, or all of them for that matter. We would also love to hear from you on social media. So please send us ideas, suggestions, feedback. Let us know what you're enjoying right now, so we can continue to make content you want to watch and hear. Thank you again for your support, and we will see you next time on the next episode of the Fifth Gait Podcast.